Hello, and welcome to the Justice and Coffee podcast. The podcast where we talk justice over coffee with a special guest. And this week, I had the pleasure of talking with practicing UK barrister and founder of the Malawi Bail Project, Charlotte Mackenzie. Charlotte is a South London girl who studied law in her spare time before pursuing a career as a barrister. And after what was supposed to be a 6-week legal internship in Malawi, aged 21, she decided to start an organisation to help the many wrongfully incarcerated people of Malawi. It's an amazing story. So, you know what to do. Grab a brew, that rhyme was unintentional, and listen in to my interview with Charlotte Mackenzie. But one thing I haven't noticed is, are you drinking coffee at the moment?
Yeah, I am.
Excellent. In that case, we can begin. Charlotte, welcome to the Justice and Coffee podcast. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a shame that we just do this audio, like we don't record a visual, because you just showed me your coffee cup mug and it looked quite exotic. It had a bit of an animal print on there and everything.
Yeah, well, it's Malawian. It's from Dedza Pottery in Malawi, which is, where you get your mugs from.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So like all podcasts, all people we interview, we ask them the same opening question, which is, it's got to be about coffee. Are you a coffee drinker? How do you drink your coffee? What coffee do you go for? Take your pick.
Yes, I am a coffee drinker. I would say if I had lots of time, if it's Saturday morning, no like toddler screaming, I'd get my Malawi beans, grind them up, cafetiere on the hob, lovely full fat milk, delicious. But my reality today is I feel nervous even saying this, but I have one of those pod machines, the espresso pod machines. I know, but they are recyclable pods. And in my defense, if I need coffee quickly and it's hot, it's really great.
They're very convenient, aren't they? Those pod machines.
But I can feel you judging me through the screen.
I'm judging you hard, but you did say you had Malawian coffee. That's amazing.
Yeah, from Mazuzu. A friend actually came over. Somebody came over from Malawi a couple of months ago. They brought me back some. So, it's really delicious. It's great.
That's amazing. I've never tasted Malawian coffee before, so that's something I'll have to look out for.
Yeah, well, I'll have to send you some.
That would be great. I should have sent you some in advance of this. My bad for not doing that. So let's start at the beginning. We've brought you on here. I want to hear all about the Malawi Bail Project. This is a fantastic organization I've recently become aware of, but I want to get back to the start, wherever you consider the start to be, but where that mustard seed, that grain first took roots. Where do you think that your pursuit of justice, in whatever auspices it's turned out to be, where do you think that first began?
I think probably, I grew up in Croydon. I had quite a lot of experience with the police, not personally, I should say, not me personally, but I had quite a lot of, experience of witnessing police action on the streets. And I think when I was about 15, I was at a sort of youth club and we had some older teenagers come along and they sort of smashed everything up. And, luckily no one was sort of seriously injured, but afterwards the police came and sort of interviewing everyone. And there was a group of us, and one of my friends was part of the group being questioned, and sort of he was taken off to the side, and it was quite clear to see that the sort of tone of the questioning and what was happening had changed. My friend was black. For me, it was quite clear to me that was the reason that he had been taken separate from us. There was just no other reason for it. And, I went over and asked the reason why he'd been separated out. Obviously, there was no answer. It's quite clearly his race. And, I was sort of, I just became very frustrated. I was asking for their sort of police badge number, writing things down, taking a note. And yeah, so I guess it was my first sort of real experience of, I guess, unfair treatment, rather than some injustice. But yeah, after that, I was very interested in the law. They didn't offer it at my school as an A level, so I went to Croydon College and studied law in the evenings in addition to my other A levels at school.
Oh wow! So you did that
Yeah,
outside of your studies?
Yeah, on a Thursday evening, I think on Saturdays and the weekends. Yeah. So it was like an additional A level, but I was just interested in it, and obviously it stuck. So
That's remarkable, and I can picture that as an ex-police officer. I can picture that 15-year-old girl demanding my collar number and challenging me. Very good. That's amazing. So this young teenager from Croydon, I used to live in South Norwood, just up the road for several years, so I know where you're talking about. How did you go from that to? I haven't introduced you properly on this podcast, but you're now a practicing barrister.
Yeah.
So connect those two parts of your life for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't have anyone really in my family or sort of, family friend group who was in the law. So I didn't really have, a reference point. One of my mum's friends knew somebody who was a barrister, and she very kindly would meet me on a Saturday and help me with the law course that I was doing. And she was a real mentor for me, actually. And she was my only reference point, and she was, it was nice to have sort of female barrister to sort of see what she was doing and where I could go. And then I went to Exeter University and studied law, and then came back to London afterwards, and I completed the bar course. And so I finished the bar course when I was 21, and then you can apply for pupillage, which is the sort of 12-month training period before you become a barrister. So you have to apply to a chambers usually, and it's pretty competitive to actually get the pupillage. And so I applied, to lots of chambers, thinking, sure, I'm going to become a barrister at 21. Will absolutely happen. And I did not get, I did not get. I don't think I even got interviewed that first round. I think I just, didn't get anywhere. And so I thought, well, I can sort of stay here and get, a paralegal job or something in London, something vaguely legal related, and then apply next year, or I can see what else is out there. So I applied to the Inner Temple. So I don't know if you probably don't know, it's quite a sort of niche area, but when you become a barrister, you have to join an Inn of Court. There are 4 Inns of Court. Mine is Inner Temple. And they offer scholarships for various things, but the scholarship that I applied for was to either study or work in a different jurisdiction. And that I applied to go to Malawi for 4 weeks and work with a paralegal-led NGO, drafting bail applications in prisons. And that's how I ended up in Malawi.
Amazing. So you're 21 years old. You've graduated University of Exeter with a degree in law. You're searching for your first placement. You've passed the bar. That's no small achievement, as I understand. and you end up taking this opportunity 4 weeks in Malawi. What did you know about Malawi before you went out there?
Absolutely nothing. I was completely naive. It's just ridiculous. Looking back now, it's just unbelievable. I mean, obviously my parents and sort of grandparents at the time were not, I wouldn't say they weren't supportive, but they certainly weren't happy about me going to work in prisons in Malawi. But I think when I was studying at Exeter, I had a human rights lecturer, and I remember at the time she'd sent something round about this organization. I thought it was really interesting, and I contacted them, and they sort of said, it's actually Victor Mahanga, who is the executive director of CHREEA, which is the organization at the time. He sort of emailed me back and said, thanks, but we need people with experience. You haven't even finished your degree yet, sorry, but we're not really interested. And so then when the opportunity for the scholarship came up, I thought of them again, and they were more interested in my help at that stage. And sorry, what was the question?
I think it was just like, what did you know about Malawi before you?
Oh yeah, fine. So that's when you're about CHREEA. Okay, I don't know if I answered that. Probably not.
So what can you tell us for those people that might know of Malawi as an African country, but little else besides that. What are the highlights? Maybe some of the great things about Malawi, and maybe some of the less great things, perhaps the things why you were working there in a legal capacity.
Yeah, so I mean, Malawi is known as Africa for beginners, because it's such a great place. Everybody's so friendly. It's known as the warm heart of Africa. Yeah, the people are just wonderful, so welcoming. And even when I first started working with CHREEA, as I said, I was a 21-year-old girl from, I really had very little legal experience. Probably didn't have that much to offer, but they just showed me everything. They took me to prison the first day I was there, in speaking directly with prisoners. It was, they were, welcoming is just really how I can describe Malawi. I mean, the downsides of Malawi for me are related to the legal system, and the treatment of prisoners. And I wouldn't say, I mean, there is definitely a culture of police corruption, and there has been historically a culture of corruption within the government. But generally, the sort of activities and the project work that we do and that CHREEA does is very well received by police officers, by magistrates, by stakeholders in the justice system, because they are overwhelmed and underfunded. When I talk about the treatment of prisoners, the big problem in Malawi is in sort of the legal system is prison overcrowding. So Malawi has a population of, I think, over 20 million now, and its prison population is relatively small. It's about, I think, around 15,000 people in prison. That doesn't include those that have been arrested and detained at police stations, which there are also large numbers, but it's very difficult to sort of track the numbers of those people. So it's a fairly small prison population, but the system just wasn't built to hold that many people. I mean, CHREEA prison, which is, I think, the second largest prison in Malawi, it's in the sort of southeastern region where we work, and is the sort of main prison where we work. That prison was built to hold 800 people, and it normally holds between sort of 1,500 and 2,000. So when I was there, cells that were built to hold sort of 60 to 80 people are holding over 200. And the reality of that is that people, when they go in of an evening, around 6 o'clock to for the night, it's like sardines. People are just lying next to each other. They might have some round the wall, around the side of the cell, but everybody else is sort of, and they just have to turn at night, when everybody turns, and sort of your status in the prison will determine where you are in the cell. Obviously, if you've been there for a longer time, you might get a sort of place around the outside, versus if you've just been arrested and thrown into CHREEA, you're going to be in the middle of the cell where it's really rough. And in terms of sort of there's into CHREEA, there used to be, when I was there, 2 showers for only 2,000 men. It is inhumane, it is degrading, but as I say, the people that are working in the system are really, they do really want the help, and they do really want to work with CHREEA and work with us, because our aim is to reduce the unnecessary detention of people, and they're open to that.
So before I ask my next question, you mentioned CHREEA a number of times now, so I just want you to spell it out. What does CHREEA stand for?
Yeah, so CHREEA, so they're the Centre for Human Rights, Education, Advice and Assistance, and they are the paralegal-led NGO that I went to work with initially in Malawi, and that's where the Malawi Bail Project came from. So the project was sort of built in collaboration with them in 2012.
So 2012 was when you were still young, right? This was when you were 21 years old. You took your internship, and you've gone from Exeter, London, Croydon to Malawi, and I can only imagine going into prisons and witnessing the scenes that you've witnessed. Like, as someone who clearly has a sensitivity to injustice, that must have been quite an overwhelming experience. Like, how did you feel emotionally? How did that affect you?
Yeah, it definitely was overwhelming, and it became quite clear, very quickly that I wasn't going home after 4 weeks. I didn't feel able to sort of have seen what I'd seen and just say, okay, yeah, I'll just hop back on the plane to London and just get on with my life. It was, it's changed my life completely. You know, I one of the prisoners who I met in those early weeks was somebody called Boxton, who was at the time awaiting trial. So I think when I met him, I think he'd probably been detained for 6 years, still awaiting trial. So, he hasn't been convicted. He's just on remand, and he was on remand for homicide. So, serious crime. But 6 years waiting for trial I couldn't understand it. He was acquitted after I think nearly 8 years. And when he came out, he wanted to train as a paralegal. He wanted to help others who were suffering the injustices that he had. And then we helped him to do that. And he now works under the Bail Project as a paralegal, going into prisons and helping others because he felt very strongly that he wanted to give back after that. But he was one of the people that I met, and he had a huge impact on me. I know he has on others because of his just ability to remain positive in that situation. I would have been incredibly I don't know how I would feel, just whether I would still be able to, continue after 6 years. I don't know. And so he had a huge impact on me.
Amazing. You just talked about Boxton's case that he was in pre-trial detention for 6 years, and the conditions you described are horrendous. Can it be the case that people just never make trial because under those conditions they die or are killed, or am I being too dramatic?
No, not at all. I mean, there are obviously, when you're in conditions like that, infectious disease is rife, and some people just don't make it. I mean, there was I know that MSF had a base in CHREEA prison until quite recently, and
MSF being Doctors Without Borders.
Yes, yeah,
Médecins Sans
absolutely.
Frontières.
Yes, sorry, yeah, and they had really helped, and CHREEA had really helped in terms of trying to separate out people if they did have an infectious disease, to separate them out from others. But it's just very, very difficult. And a lot of people may be innocent, and just awaiting trial, and may not make it to their trial date. I mean, the infectious disease is one thing, but malnutrition is a huge issue. I mean, in CHREEA you get fed twice a day if you're lucky. You might get a sort of a bowl of sort of porridge, like a maize-based dish, and maybe some beans. But they rely on family members to visit and bring food, because otherwise, it's just not sustainable. And that's how, I think is important to remember, is that the majority of prisoners we work with are men, because it's majority. The majority of prisoners in Malawi are men. There are, I think, around 300 female prisoners, but it's a very small number. But their imprisonment affects their family, their community. If children have to leave school so that they can travel with their mother to go to the prison to bring food, or they have to start work at a young age to try and fund to pay for a private lawyer, which is just unaffordable for most people. So it doesn't just affect the person that's imprisoned; it affects their family and communities, and ultimately, Malawi as a whole. And that's why it's sometimes difficult to sell, what we do as important, because it's very difficult to, relate to a male prisoner in Malawi. But it's so much bigger than that.
I was going to ask that, and I haven't given you an opportunity yet to really give us an understanding of the Malawi Bail Project and how it works and what you do. But one of my questions was going to be, like, from a fundraising point of view, or for raising support, if you're talking about adult African men in jail, helping those, is that a challenge? Does that become a difficult issue for fundraising? What's your experience been like of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hugely challenging. I mean, the bail project, the focus is to reduce overcrowding, but really it's an access to justice project. It's an education project. We want every person who is detained or arrested and goes through a police station or a court holding cell to have access to our materials about how to apply for bail. And the question inevitably comes, well, what if you're releasing somebody on bail who's violent or who is an offender? And it's a difficult question. I mean, we target sort of the whole process. So we also run trainings for magistrates and police officers to make sure that the decisions on bail, are grounded. That they are grounded in law. They're making the right decisions. They're looking at the various factors. They're looking at if they have community ties, if they have been a previous offender, the sorts of factors you would consider in a bail application. So we want that to be done properly to safeguard against the risk that people are out on bail if they have already committed offences. But I want to stress that the majority of people that we assist have been arrested for minor petty offences, crimes that are normally committed, if they have been committed, out of poverty, stealing food to feed your family, those sorts of things. There's huge numbers of people in Malawi that are detained under sort of old laws, colonial laws, that just haven't been removed. Rogue and vagabond is a law that was in place that CHREEA took to the High Court to challenge and say this law it's unconstitutional. And because it's such a wide law, and it means that lots of people can be detained just for Malawi is a poor country. Lots of people are walking the streets without much to do, and it gives the police huge powers to arrest and then charge for bail, which they shouldn't, because police bail is free. But they charge to be released.
It's a great tool as well for police officers that are looking to score bribes. If there's a good community knowledge that you can end up languishing in pre-trial detention before you even get your day in court, before you even get to challenge the evidence that's being held against you, you could spend years incarcerated.
Yeah,
that it gives the police a huge tool to illicit bribes from a sort of for that leverage. Well, I'll just arrest you and under some antiquated law like being a vagabond, and unless you pay me, I'll drive you around until you can find the money, and then I'll let you out the car. If you don't find the money, you're off to prison, buddy. Wow, that's incredible. And you mentioned access to a lawyer. Like, does Malawi have a public defender program? Are there free lawyers available? I take it there aren't, or if there are very few. But what's the situation with that?
Yeah, so there is a legal aid department, but there are such a small number of lawyers. I mean, when I was working there were, I think, around 20 lawyers, the legal aid department sort of in the whole country. And so it's just not feasible for them to take. I mean, they take on the very serious cases that they get assigned, but for your average person who's arrested under maybe a law like rogue and vagabond, idle and disorderly, something like that, by a police officer, I mean, you're just never going to see. You would just never have access to a lawyer, and the reality is that you could be arrested for something like that if you don't know that you have the right to bail, if the police don't tell you have the right to bail, if when you get into court the magistrates don't say, do you want to make a bail application, you can end up in CHREEA. Your case file is lost, it's forgotten, and 2.5 years later you might have someone from CHREEA come across you and say, well, hang on, you've been here for 2 years, your remand warrant's expired. Let's do something about that. So we want to intervene at an early stage before somebody ends up in prison, because once somebody is in prison, it's very difficult to get back out again.
One of the things we were mentioning was these long periods in pre-trial detention, and I can't remember exactly, but I'll take a stab at it, and you can correct me as a trained barrister in the UK legal system. But so with PACE, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, we have 24 hours to basically charge or release, and it can be extended. And there might be people going, no, it's changed, Bryn, it's changed. But when I was in the police, we had 24 hours to charge. or release or bail, or I think what they now say is released under investigation or pending further investigation, that can be extended to 36 hours under certain conditions. So like major cases like murders or rapes, they can make an application. We can make an application to the courts to extend bail. And under the Terrorism Act, we can you can extend that bail a little further. But we're talking about a matter of days. We're not talking about weeks or months or any period of indefinite period like what you've described. What's the law in Malawi then that you're trying to educate people to? What are their rights of being released under bail?
Yeah, so Malawi has, similar to the UK, the custody time limits exist. They are there. They're just not really complied with, and nobody's there to challenge it. In the UK, you would have a barrister. Well, at the moment, you don't, because criminal barristers are on strike in the UK.
What? Are you? Oh, you're not a criminal barrister at the moment.
I'm not on strike. I'm a family barrister. I when I started pupillage, I did practice in crime, but it just wasn't financially sustainable for me. I mean, obviously, I was interested in family law as well, and that's ultimately where my practice has led. But yeah, it just wasn't financially sustainable, and that was in 2015, 2016. I mean, it's just even worse now. So very supportive of the strike, and hope that the new Justice Secretary Brandon Lewis has agrees to meet with the Criminal Bar Association, which Dominic Raab did not. But rant over on that. You should have access to a barrister who would challenge, if there's been a breach of the custody time limits, and be making an application for bail. But because CHREEA estimate that 90% of the people going through the criminal justice system in Malawi won't have access to a lawyer at any stage. It just doesn't get challenged.
That's huge. 90% of the people going through the criminal justice system in Malawi don't have access to a lawyer.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they can't afford it. Private lawyers are hugely expensive, and one of the problems that we have and that we address in sort of our trainings with magistrates in particular is that sometimes we will have, if somebody perhaps has had access to our materials and has asked for bail, and a magistrate has considered that application properly and granted bail, but they've said there needs to be a surety or there's a monetary condition attached, and they say, okay, well, you can have bail if you can pay 30,000 kwacha, and someone might not earn 30,000 kwacha in a year.
How would that transfer to sterling?
So I mean, I don't know the exact exchange rate today, but I'd say 30,000. It's around £30.
Wow. And they wouldn't earn that in a year?
No, it's depending on, it might be somebody who's unemployed. It might be somebody who does what's referred to as piecework, which is, where they pick up work sort of day by day, earn the money, spend that on food, and then start the next day. So the idea that somebody would have savings of that amount, let alone the ability to access that. So we focus in our trainings on means assessments, magistrates asking questions about somebody's employment status, their savings, etc., before saying that you can have bail if you can pay this, when it's just not feasible for somebody to pay that.
So let's have it then. Let's have the Malawi Bail Project's approach. You've mentioned training magistrates, but give me what are you? Here's the problem. We've heard about the problem. Like, how are you going about creating some sort of a solution or addressing that problem?
Yeah, so we focus firstly on education. So we have booklets, sort of how to apply for bail, which is sort of majority sort of pictures because of the low literacy level in Malawi, and some text. And then we also have audio tapes that are played at police stations and court holding cells, which give information about what bail is and how to exercise that right. And we also have a program with a group of ex-prisoners called Nkokwe Arts Group, who were previously in CHREEA. They were a drama group there, and after release, they continue to do theatre performances as a form of rehabilitation, but also it's employment, because we pay them a sort of stipend for each performance. And CHREEA and I have worked with the group to develop a performance about the consequences of crime, what can happen if you end up being arrested by the police, how to deal with police corruption, and what bail is. And these performances are done in sort of community areas, in marketplaces, and it's unbelievable watching these performances. Sometimes we get audiences of 500, 600 people. Wow. Just crowding around, filming it on their phones. Just kids, children. So it's so engaging, it's so interactive, and it just means that we're able to get important sort of legal information across in a really fun and accessible way. And so that, as well as it is a good way of sort of educating communities on their legal rights. We focus on, as we've already spoken about, some trainings of magistrates and police officers. So police officers in Malawi have sort of 6 months mandatory training. They don't have any sort of really specialist training on issues, such as bail or corruption. We focus on junior officers. We do invite more senior officers to our training, but we focus, our focus at the moment is on junior officers, so student police officers, because we hope that sort of the new officers, coming up, if they're trained, in sort of anti-corruption, that it's sort of, filter through. It's obviously more difficult to deal with sort of some of the senior officers who have been, practicing corruption for a very long time. So we have training sessions. They're sort of group exercises. Where we look at case studies and what you should do in this sort of situation. It seems a fairly basic premise that you shouldn't torture somebody in detention. You shouldn't be beating up anyone, but these sorts of things develop within the police system when there's nobody there, when they're looking up to senior officers who might have been doing this practice for a long time. It's something, the idea of human rights is quite new. We also train magistrates, so I've already spoken about actually how to exercise their discretion in relation to bail applications. And again, lots of magistrates, whilst they might be experienced, there's different grades of magistrates. And sort of the lowest grade, they don't even have to have a sort of secondary school education. So they, they themselves may lack the sort of, the knowledge of in relation to those specific bail issues and the wider issues surrounding bail. And then finally, we have a toll-free line which is manned 24/7 by the paralegals at CHREEA. So we have some phone handsets that can be accessed at police stations to call CHREEA, and sometimes we get calls from officers, who ask for us to come and help. They've got cells filled with people, and they're not sure how to process each case, or they might have somebody that's a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, or there's somebody they think is even younger, and they want CHREEA's advice about how to deal with sort of the juvenile in the system. So those are the sort of the main activities that we have in communities with the public and with magistrates and police officers. But the final sort of activity that we run is something called a camp court. And that is where we bring a magistrate to the prison and they run a court literally from inside the prison. So CHREEA will identify the most sort of vulnerable remandees and bring them forward for the camp court. And then a magistrate can consider sort of 15 to 20 bail applications in a session, and normally between 10 and 15 of those are granted, because they're, the prosecution don't have a case really to put forward. But those are our main, that's our main focus.
Amazing. So with what you're doing, what's the political reception like for it? I mean, I can see it both ways. Some people can think, wow, they're taking prisoners out of jail. These lawyers are disrupting the criminal justice system. But really, if anyone would take the time to listen, it sounds like you're doing them a huge favor if there's that level of overcrowding, if they're arguably in breach of people's, well, not arguably, quite clearly in breach of people's human rights there. I know that Malawi are a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council. How is it politically received, what you're doing, what CHREEA are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as you said, really. I mean, there is a problem, and we're helping to address it. people are detained either unnecessarily, but most of the time unlawfully. And, we're just intervening at an early stage to really prevent that from happening. So it's, as I said, we've had, the CHREEA itself is a very well-respected organisation within Malawi, but internationally as well. And they are respected by not only communities but also stakeholders, judges, magistrates, police officers. People are always keen to be involved in the trainings and assist in any way they can. So I think the reception of the project is really down to CHREEA's work, and they're such dedicated individuals, and they just want to deal with injustice in a fair way.
I'm going to wrap up now with the same questions I ask every guest, which is, with all that you've described, with all that you've shared today, I want to hear what really gets you going, what really makes you angry about the world, but also what gives you hope.
I'm angry about a lot of things, but I think, on the thread of justice, I think what I find frustrating is that in a lot of places in the world, the outcome of the legal process is so heavily dependent on your socioeconomic status. I find that very difficult. Equality before the law is one thing, but if you can't afford a lawyer and you don't have access to a state lawyer, you just don't have the same rights. You can't exercise those rights. They're meaningless, and that I find that very difficult. And that's really where the Bail Project sort of came from, ensuring that everybody has representation. If they can't access a lawyer, how can we empower them to represent themselves? How can we give them those tools? Yeah. Okay. What gives me hope? What gives me hope? People give me hope, really. I'm referring to CHREEA again. I'm referring to Box and people like that I've met in Malawi, that have faced huge challenges that I don't think that I would myself be able to overcome. And they're still positive and they're still hopeful. And it's just about working together, about community, small steps, but, focusing on something that you're passionate about. And yeah, I'm grateful every day for my relationship with CHREEA, as a charity, but also, they're my friends. I love them, and they have changed my life completely. And they're an inspiration to me, really. So they make me hopeful, really.
Amazing. People listening, they might be young Charlotte Mackenzies that are just studying law somewhere in the UK and thinking, well, I want to do something with my life. I want to have an impact. I'm not sure I want to apply all this knowledge purely in the defense of, I don't know, some sort of corporate law or housing law. I'm not saying those aren't very worthy causes, but they want to see something, maybe a more of an immediate impact on the world of justice and helping human beings around the world. How can they come and find out more about you guys, and how can we support you? It means what you're doing is amazing, and I'm so inspired by what you're doing, as will many people be who are listening. So how can we back you up?
Yeah, get in touch. I mean, we see our website, Instagram, Twitter, email, whatever. Just get in touch, because we had somebody last week who got in touch who happened to be in Blantyre in Malawi, heard about our project. He's a barrister from the UK, or training to be a barrister. And yeah, he sent an email, and next week he was shadowing Sipiwe, who's our project supervisor, and showing him about the project. So there's work in Malawi to be done, with CHREEA, but also in the UK. I'm always happy to speak to anyone who's interested in either Malawi in human rights, but also I'm a family barrister, 42 Bedford Row Chambers, and I'm always happy to sort of mentor or speak to anyone who's interested in the law. So yeah, get in touch.
And if someone wants to donate to you guys, how do they do that? And maybe give us an idea of how you would use that money.
Yeah, so you can donate via our website, via Facebook, via Instagram. We do rely on sort of monthly donations from donors, and then sort of trusts and foundations that we make applications to. So, to give you an idea, it costs £1 for us to print a booklet. So, £10 is 10 booklets. And, that's not just read by 10 people, it's probably read by, 50 people, 100 people, because those booklets will just stay in circulation. So that's, that even, small donations are really, really great for us. A camp court, to run one camp court where, as I say, 15 to 20 bail applications can be heard. That costs us about £150. So, what price would you put on your liberty, I guess, is the question, really. £150, that's probably 15 people being released from prison, that day. It's instant, action. And I think it's relatively low cost for high impact when we're talking about people's liberty. So, we're very grateful for any donations.
If someone was, let's say, take that second example, if they were to go, you know what, boom, I'm going to take my birthday present or Christmas present or whatever, a bit of savings, and I'm going to sponsor a camp court. Do they have any opportunity to know that actually you funded this one we held last week and this so-and-so, and as a consequence, 7 people are no longer being held in just inhumane conditions in pre-trial detention? Is that possible? Can you pass that sort of information on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we will, we'll give, we always sort of pass on the details of who's been released, the sorts of, cases that were heard. Absolutely. Yeah.
Like you say, like from a return on investment point of view, what an amazing thing to do with your money. Charlotte, thanks so much for spending some time with me this morning. I know you're a super busy and very impressive woman and mum, and you have lots of demands on your time. So thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
I often say at the end that if you know of any person or project that we should feature on the Justice and Coffee podcast, then please get in touch. And that's exactly what happened here. Charlotte was a listener and reached out to introduce herself, and I'm so glad that she did. It is such a joy and a privilege for us to meet people like Charlotte and hear their stories. You can find out more about the Malawi Bail Project by visiting their website, www.malawibailproject.com. Perhaps you're a budding barrister looking for legal experience. Why not reach out to Charlotte and her team, or her colleagues at CHREEA? I've put a link in the show notes for both of their websites. You may be a student considering a future career in the law, and I'm sure there are very many good reasons why you may choose to work in negotiating property ownership rights or dealing with trademark infringements. It really is all necessary stuff. But perhaps you may first decide to have a crack at releasing people around the world wrongfully held in pre-trial detention, often until a premature death from a preventable disease. How about that for a calling? And for those of you who aren't budding lawyers to be, perhaps you'd like to give a donation and sponsor a camp court. What a fabulous thing to do with your money. This podcast was produced by Blue Bear Coffee Company. You can buy a subscription of ethically sourced specialty coffee from us, and know that we use our profits to support and equip survivors of abuse, sexual exploitation and trafficking. Go to bluebearcoffee.com to find out more and load up on coffee. Thank you once again for listening. Speak soon. Peace.